Now, winning the war was one thing, but the main issue that America now has to contend with is creating a cohesive government. Now, as I said, the American colonies did bring over a number of British traditions. And because they had this, because the colonists themselves had so much experience with self government, this isn't going to be an entirely new concept. On the other hand, it's not going to be a totally smooth ride either. Many of the colonies are very much reluctant at creating a strong central government. The fact that they've just gotten rid of a strong central government. They want to look after their own. The Articles of Confederation, which was the first series of government, basically there would be a small Congress in which every colony had a representative. But for the most part, the Continental Congress couldn't really do anything unless they almost had unanimous support. And because the representatives are going to be listening to their own state governments, there's actually a lot of friction. So, really, what you have are 13 individual states with very little uniting them. So, what we had to have was the Congressional Convention, in which case there was going to be a lot of compromise in terms of what exactly do we need to be a successful country, and they would debate it over and over again until they finally got to the idea that, okay, yes, we are going to have a strong central government, but how are we going to do this that's going to be the most fair for all parties involved? And how do we do this without replicating the situation that got us into the Revolutionary War? So we want to make sure we have a government which is not going to totally dictate the rights of the states. There has to be separation between federal powers and state powers, state sovereignty. So there's a lot of compromise in terms of the branches of government, slavery, states' rights, political freedoms, representation, and voting with the Electoral College. And they're all very much significant limitation into who gets what. So, for example, there are two major plans that are bandied about: the Connecticut Plan and the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan was very much banking on this idea of each state has congressional representatives based on their population. So this was going to be something that would benefit the largest states the most. But then you have the Connecticut Plan, which is basically saying, okay, look, small states are pretty much getting jipped down to this. And no matter what we do, we are going to be dominated by the larger states. So we think you should only have one representative per state. So there has to be compromise, and this comes up within the New Jersey plan, in which the Virginia plan becomes what's known as the House of Representatives, and then, of course, the Connecticut plan is going to take the form of the Senate. Then there has to be the creation of the judicial branch, the fact that all states will have their own courts, but there also has to be a federal court system, the executive branch, and then, of course, the various checks that are on that executive branch. And then there's the idea of what is a citizen. And as your book lays out towards the end, you see it's really more of the idea of who isn't a citizen. Blacks are not citizens, regardless of whether they are or are not slaves. And they're almost not even considered persons because of the Three-Fifths Compromise. This was done to basically bolster up the southern states to make sure they get as many representatives as they wanted. Whereas a slave is considered to be 3/5 of a person. Northern states were arguing, well, they can't really be, you can't count them as a full person if you're not going to give them rights. And of course, southern states are going to use the paternalistic argument that, well, we are looking after their own well being. Women are not going to have any rights, and it comes to a point where only individuals who are able to vote are white landowning males of a certain age. So again, that British tradition. So that equality that's really associated with the United States. In the early years, it's definitely more equal than other countries, say France, but there are significant limitations on it. So let's go ahead and move over to France. The American Revolution was indicative that Enlightenment ideals could triumph over an established government. But the emergence of a new nation state across the Atlantic really impacted Europe very little. So the American Revolution was over, there's this new struggling little state. They're definitely going to be interacting with it. The Americans send over a number of ambassadors into London, into France, etc. There are definitely visits paid, indemnities paid back. But again, it doesn't affect Europe because they are so far away. It's not until France begins their own revolution when the ideas of the Enlightenment and how they can affect the political and social system actually become rather alarming for Europe. Now, in France, there is a strong desire to reform the old regime. The old regime is the social, political, and economic order of France that is based completely on privilege. There are the first, second, and third estates. The first estate is anyone affiliated with the church, all the way from abbots to archbishops, all the way down to priests, monks, etc. No one can be higher than God. So everyone who is affiliated with the church is in that particular estate. The second estate would be the nobility and the monarchy, because they would be the next closest to God. That's why they're number 2. The third estate is everybody else. So it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are. If you are not affiliated with the church in terms of that is where your livelihood comes from, or if you do not have an aristocratic title, you're in the third estate. Now, the first and second estates pay no taxes. And they pay no taxes because they've given up a number of their political rights to Louis XIII and XIV in order for them to really become absolute monarchs. On the other hand, they do have significant other privileges. And they're also definitely own the majority of the land. And yet, the third estate, although they definitely do have individuals of the wealthy classes among them, they probably own the least amount of wealth, and yet they pay the most taxes. Now, after the 7 Years' War, their contributions to the American Revolution, France is leaning towards bankruptcy. And so Louis XVI is going to have to raise taxes or gain some sort of revenue. But he cannot do so without calling the Estates General. The Estates General are representatives of all 3 estates, and they haven't been called in over a century. So this is a big thing for France. For them to, all the estates basically know what the France's problems are, in terms of the fact that the king needs money. But they also want to get something out of it for themselves. Estates 1 and 2 aren't going to pay any money unless they can get some of their power back in return. And the third estate, if they are going to have to pay taxes, they're looking at this, or more taxes, they're really looking at the calling of the Estates General as a chance to get more recognition and equal voting. What's going to happen at the Estates General is going to basically kick off the French Revolution.